Imagine waking up from surgery and finding out that your husband of 28 years sold your house while you were under anesthesia. It's like going under the knife a second time, except this cut goes straight through your heart. I'm Anna, and I'm 55 years old. This is my story. 3 years ago, I thought I had the perfect life. Darren and I had been married for 28 years. Our 2 kids, Marcus and Lily, were both grown and living their own lives, Marcus in Seattle working for a tech company, and Lily in Denver finishing her master's degree. We'd worked hard to build our life together, and the crown jewel was our beautiful home. That house wasn't just a house to me. It was everything. We'd saved for 15 years to buy it, spent weekends restoring the original hardwood floors, painting every room ourselves, and turning the backyard into this incredible garden sanctuary. I'd hosted Marcus's graduation party there, walked Lily down our grand staircase on her prom night, and dreamed of having grandchildren run through those same halls someday. Darren seemed to love it too, or at least I thought he did. He'd always complained about the mortgage payments, sure, but I figured that was just normal husband grumbling. I mean, who doesn't complain about bills, right? Everything started falling apart last spring. I'd been having these terrible stomach pains for months, but you know how it is, you keep putting off the doctor, thinking it'll get better on its own. Darren kept saying I was being dramatic, that it was probably just stress from my job at the accounting firm. But the pain got worse. I'm talking doubled over, can't breathe kind of pain. Finally, Marcus called me one Sunday and heard me gasping through the phone. He literally threatened to fly home and drag me to the hospital if I didn't go immediately. The diagnosis hit like a freight train, gallbladder cancer. Stage 2. The doctor said I needed surgery right away, followed by aggressive chemotherapy. I remember sitting in that sterile office, hearing words like malignant and metastasis, and feeling like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. Darren was quiet during the appointment. Really quiet. I kept looking at him, waiting for him to reach for my hand or say something comforting, but he just sat there staring at the floor. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks later. During those 2 weeks, something shifted in Darren. He became distant. Cold, even. When I tried to talk to him about my fears, about what would happen if the cancer had spread, he'd change the subject or find some excuse to leave the room. The kids wanted to fly home for the surgery, but I convinced them not to. Marcus had just started a new project at work, and Lily was in the middle of her thesis defense. I told them their dad would be there, that I'd be fine. God, I was so naive. The night before surgery, I couldn't sleep. I found Darren in his office at 2 in the morning, hunched over his laptop. When I asked what he was doing, he slammed it shut and said he was just paying bills. Something felt off, but I was so focused on the surgery that I didn't push it. The surgery took longer than expected. What should have been a 4-hour procedure stretched to 8 hours. I was in recovery for 3 days, heavily sedated and barely conscious. On the 4th day, when I was finally alert enough to hold a conversation, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson came to visit. She looked uncomfortable, kept fidgeting with her purse strap and avoiding eye contact. Anna, honey, she finally said, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's been a lot of activity at your house. Moving trucks, real estate signs. I thought I was hallucinating from the pain medication. What are you talking about? Darren sold the house, dear. The new owners moved in yesterday. The words didn't compute. They literally didn't make sense in my brain. I started laughing because it was so absurd. Sold the house? While I was in surgery? That was impossible. You can't just sell someone's house without their signature, right? Wrong. When Darren finally showed up that evening, and I used the word finally, because apparently he'd been too busy to visit his cancer patient wife for 2 whole days, I confronted him. Mrs. Patterson says you sold our house. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Just shrugged and said, we needed the money for your medical bills. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Without discussing it with me first. Without even telling me. You were unconscious, Anna. Someone had to make the hard decisions. That's when he explained his twisted logic. He'd been forging my signature on documents for months, preparing for this moment. He'd contacted a real estate investor who specialized in quick cash sales. No inspections, no contingencies, just a fast close for about 60% of what our house was actually worth. Where are we supposed to live? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I found us a nice apartment across town. Much more manageable. You'll see, this is actually a blessing in disguise. A blessing in disguise. Those words still make me angry. When I was discharged a week later, Darren drove me to our new home, a cramped two-bedroom apartment in the worst part of town. The carpet was stained, the kitchen appliances were from the 1980s, and you could hear every conversation the neighbors had through the paper-thin walls. All of our beautiful furniture was gone. Sold, Darren explained, because it was too big for the space. He'd kept the bare minimum, a cheap couch, a dining table, our bed. Everything else, including family heirlooms and photos, had been donated or thrown away. I sat in that horrible apartment and cried for 3 hours straight. 28 years of memories, gone. The house where I'd raised my children, gone. My sense of security, my trust in my husband, my faith in our marriage, all gone. When Marcus and Lily found out, they were furious. And I mean furious. Marcus flew home immediately and had a screaming match with his father in the apartment parking lot. Lily called Darren crying, begging him to explain how he could do this to me. But here's the thing that really broke my heart, Darren had convinced them that I was being dramatic about the whole situation. He painted himself as the responsible one who'd made a tough but necessary decision to save our finances. Your mother's medical bills are going to be astronomical, he told them. Would you rather have a house or a living mother? That manipulation tactic worked, at least partially. While the kids were still upset about the method, they started to understand his reasoning. Maybe Dad had made the right choice, even if he'd gone about it the wrong way. I felt so isolated. So betrayed. Not just by Darren, but by my own children's willingness to see his side of things. The chemotherapy started 3 weeks after surgery. If you've never been through chemo, let me tell you, it's like having the worst flu of your life while someone systematically poisons your body from the inside out. I was weak, nauseous, and losing my hair in clumps. I needed help with basic tasks like grocery shopping and cleaning. You know who should have been there to help? My husband of 28 years. Instead, Darren seemed to view my illness as a personal inconvenience. He'd sigh dramatically when I asked him to drive me to appointments. He'd complain about having to cook dinner or do his own laundry. One day, when I was too sick to get out of bed, he actually said, "This cancer thing is really putting a damper on our social life." Our social life. As if my fight for survival was somehow cramping his style. 2 months into chemo, I made a devastating discovery. I was looking for our insurance papers when I found bank statements hidden in Darren's desk drawer. Our joint account, which should have had the proceeds from the house sale, was nearly empty. Where had the money gone? Well, apparently Darren had been living quite the double life. Credit card bills for expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Hotel charges for weekend trips I'd never taken. And here's the kicker, payments to someone named Vivian. I did some digging, and it didn't take long to figure out who Vivian was. She was a 28-year-old receptionist at Darren's company. They'd been having an affair for over 2 years, and my husband had been using our house money to wine and dine his girlfriend. The cancer wasn't bankrupting us. Darren's midlife crisis was. I confronted him on a Tuesday evening. I was feeling slightly better after my chemo session, and I'd spent the day gathering evidence. Bank statements, credit card bills, even photos I'd found on his phone. Who is Vivian? I asked, laying everything out on our cheap dining table. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, Darren looked genuinely scared. His face went white, and he started stammering about how I'd misunderstood what I was seeing. $60,000, Darren. You spent $60,000 of our house money on your girlfriend. He tried to deny it at first, then minimize it, then blame me. According to him, he'd only strayed because I'd become distant and difficult over the past few years. My cancer diagnosis had just made him realize how unfulfilled he was in our marriage. So you decided to sell our house to fund your affair? I asked. It wasn't like that, he said. Vivian and I are in love. We're planning to be together. I was going to tell you after you got better. Planning to be together. This man had sold our home, stolen our money, and was planning to leave me while I was fighting cancer. The affair had been going on for over 2 years, but he'd only started planning the house sale after my diagnosis. In his twisted mind, my illness was just a convenient excuse to cash out and start fresh. While Darren thought he was so clever, he'd made one crucial mistake. See, 3 years before my cancer diagnosis, when we'd refinanced the house, I'd done something that seemed insignificant at the time. My lawyer had suggested setting up a family trust to protect our assets. I'd put the house deed in the name of the trust, with myself as the primary trustee and our kids as beneficiaries, because I saw this coming. Darren had signed off on it, but he'd never really understood the legal implications. To him, it was just paperwork. He thought that as my husband, he could make decisions about our property, especially if I was incapacitated. He was wrong. I spent a very interesting afternoon with my lawyer, Eleanor Vasquez. She reviewed all the documents from the house sale, and her smile got wider with every page she turned. First, the house wasn't legally his to sell. As the property was held in trust, any sale required my explicit consent as the primary trustee. Darren had forged my signature, making the entire transaction fraudulent. Second, the quick sale company he'd worked with was legally obligated to verify ownership before closing. They'd failed to do their due diligence, making them liable as well. Third, and this was the beautiful part, since the sale was fraudulent, it was completely void. The house was still legally mine. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Eleanor said with a grin, that you can sue to have the current residents evicted and the property returned to you. It also means your husband and the real estate company owe you significant damages for fraud. I didn't tell Darren what I'd learned. Instead, I played the part of the defeated, sickly wife while Eleanor worked behind the scenes to build our case. The legal process took some time, but Eleanor was relentless. Within 3 months, we had a court order declaring the sale fraudulent and demanding that the property be returned to me. The family who'd bought the house was understandably upset, but they could pursue their damages against the real estate company and Darren. I'll never forget the day the sheriff served Darren with papers. He was getting ready for work, humming some tune and checking his phone, probably texting Vivian. When he saw the legal documents, the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "That," I said, "is karma." Darren's world fell apart piece by piece, and I had a front row seat to watch it happen. First, his company found out about the fraud charges and immediately placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. Apparently, using company resources to conduct personal business and having an affair with a subordinate were against their policy. Who knew? Second, Vivian dumped him the moment she realized he didn't actually have any money. Turns out she wasn't interested in a broke, middle-aged man facing felony charges. Shocking, I know. Third, the real estate company sued him for damages. They were on the hook for returning the house and compensating the innocent buyers, and they wanted every penny back from Darren. 8 months after Darren sold our house, I moved back in. The new owners had actually improved a few things. They'd updated the kitchen backsplash and refinished the hardwood floors, so I got my beloved home back in even better condition. Darren, meanwhile, was living in a studio apartment and facing criminal charges. He'd begged me not to press charges, promising he'd changed and that we could work things out. I laughed. Actually laughed in his face. "You sold our house while I was fighting for my life," I told him. "You stole our money to fund your affair. You planned to abandon me at my lowest point. And now you want to work things out?" The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. With evidence of fraud, adultery, and financial misconduct, Darren had no leverage whatsoever. I got the house, the remaining money from his retirement account, and alimony. His lawyer tried to argue that I should pay for his legal defense since we were still technically married when the fraud occurred. Eleanor shut that down real quick. "Your client," she told the court, "committed fraud against his own wife while she was undergoing cancer treatment. I think he can figure out his own legal bills." Marcus and Lily were initially confused by the whole situation. They couldn't understand how their father could have done something so calculated and cruel. But as the truth came out, the affair, the stolen money, the complete disregard for my well-being, they began to see Darren for who he really was. Marcus told me later that he'd always suspected something was off about Dad's story. "The timeline never made sense," he said. "If he really sold the house for medical bills, why were you still getting collection calls from the hospital?" Lily was more emotional about it. She felt guilty for not questioning Darren's version of events more thoroughly. "I should have known he was lying," she cried during one of our phone calls. "What kind of daughter am I?" I assured her that none of this was her fault. Children shouldn't have to fact-check their parents' stories about major life decisions. That's not their job. I can't help but wonder, was Darren ever really my family? Someone who could watch me fight for my life and see it as an opportunity to steal from me and plan his escape.
This is Family or Not, where we share stories that no one wants to talk about at family dinners.